The Shawshank Redemption's position as a pop culture monolith cannot be overstated. Between its iconic dialogue, wonderful performances, and deeply humanistic depiction of hope prevailing over despair, it's an all-time classic for damn fine reason. Despite its relatively modest budget and production though, Shawshank wasn't an easy shoot for anyone, with Frank Darabont and his crew scarcely avoiding disaster several times over. Between a brutally demanding shooting schedule and a fire that damn near destroyed one of the movie's major sets. And yet the end result feels so meticulously perfectly polished that you'd never guess it was such a grueling experience for all involved. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 25 things you didn't know about The Shawshank Redemption in honor of its 25th anniversary. Number 25. Morgan Freeman recorded his voiceover before shooting began. Though the typical rules of filmmaking dictate that any voiceover required for a movie is recorded during post-production, Frank Darabont took the highly unconventional move of having Morgan Freeman record Red's memorable narration before shooting had even begun. Freeman recorded the original take of the narration in an Iowa recording studio in just 40 minutes, but unfortunately there was a hiss audible on the track which couldn't be erased by the sound team. As a result, Freeman ended up having to re-record his voiceover in a better equipped studio, and this time it took an entire 3 weeks to perfect. Number 24. Stephen King sold the rights for just $5,000. Stephen King, who wrote the novel on which The Shawshank Redemption is based, ended up selling the rights to Darabont for a mere $5,000 after becoming friends with the filmmaker when he asked permission to adapt King's short story, The Woman in the Room, into a script. Another 5 years passed before Darabont wrote the script after acquiring the rights, and hilariously, King never ended up cashing the check Darabont sent him. Instead, King later framed it and sent it back to Darabont with a note saying, "In case you ever need bail money, love, Steve." Number 23. It didn't win a single Oscar. Even though The Shawshank Redemption is often regarded as one of the greatest films ever made, even holding the #1 spot on the IMDb Top 250, it curiously went home totally empty-handed at the 1995 Academy Awards. While the film was nominated for 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Actor, and Best Adapted Screenplay, it was unfortunate enough to release in a heavyweight year, facing stiff competition from both Pulp Fiction and especially Forrest Gump, with the latter winning 6 Oscars, including Best Picture. Number 22. Frank Darabont's inexperience was a frequent issue on set. Incredibly, the movie was Frank Darabont's theatrical feature debut, and his lack of experience as a filmmaker caused plenty of friction on set with the cast and crew, resulting in shooting often lasting up to 18 hours per day during 6-day weeks. Morgan Freeman took issue with the number of takes Darabont required especially, to the extent that he often refused to perform additional takes that the director requested. Curiously, Darabont bristled most though with cinematographer Roger Deakins. Darabont favoured epic sweeping shots of the prison exterior, while Deakins felt that only showing the outside of the prison occasionally would emphasise the claustrophobic tension of the piece. Number 21. Red's mugshots are of Morgan Freeman's son. During Red's parole hearing, we memorably catch a brief glimpse of a mugshot of his younger self, and rather than simply hire an actor resembling a young Freeman for the brief cameo, Freeman's own son Alonzo was drafted in to take the pictures. Alonzo also has a cameo in the film proper, shouting fresh fish today, we're reeling him in," as Andy is being brought into Shawshank in one of the opening scenes. Number 20. Frank Darabont used Goodfellas as an inspiration. Given Darabont's noted inexperience while making the movie, he quite sensibly deferred to one of the all-time filmmaking masters for inspiration during shooting. Every Sunday while making The Shawshank Redemption, Darabont would watch Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, ultimately taking note of its exemplary use of voiceover narration and sharp editing to dictate the passage of time. The irony, of course, is that Goodfellas underperformed at the Oscars just like Shawshank. Number 19. Stephen King's name was intentionally kept out of the marketing. You'd be forgiven for not actually knowing that The Shawshank Redemption was based on a Stephen King pen novella, given King's noted deference towards the horror genre and the utter lack of King's name in the film's marketing materials. This was in fact a totally intentional move on the part of Columbia Pictures, who, after seeing the film test screen extremely well, felt that an association with King might harm the film's commercial prospects, as more general audiences weren't much keen on horror. Despite the attempt to attract mainstream crowds and drum up a steady head of awards hype, this strategy actually backfired, as the film ended up bombing during its initial theatrical release. Number 18, Tom Hanks almost played Andy. It goes without saying that the role of protagonist Andy was majorly sought after in Hollywood, with the likes of Jeff Bridges, Kevin Costner, Tom Cruise, Matthew Broderick, Nicolas Cage, and Johnny Depp all either being offered or lobbying for the part before it eventually went to Tim Robbins. But the actor who likely would have played the part had it not been for scheduling conflicts was Tom Hanks, who ultimately had to turn it down due to being committed to Forrest Gump. In terms of awards, I suppose he actually kind of backed the right horse. Number 17, shooting the baseball scene took so long it injured Morgan Freeman's arm. Who can forget the early scene where Andy is introduced to Red, who is busy playing a game of catch with another inmate in the yard? Despite the seemingly simplicity of the scene, this sequence actually took a whole 9 hours to shoot. For his part though, Morgan Freeman completed the 9 hours of shooting without complaint. Yet as you might imagine, throwing a baseball back and forth for that long would aggravate anyone's arm. And as a result, Freeman came to the set next day with his left arm in a sling. Whether he truly was injured enough to require a sling or was simply trying to make a crafty point to Darabont about his shooting style, only Freeman knows. Number 16, Frank Darabont took a huge pay cut to direct the movie himself. After Frank Darabont completed his script for the movie and it began doing the rounds in Hollywood, director Rob Reiner, who had previously helmed Stand By Me, also based off a King novella, loved the script enough to offer Darabont $2.5 million for the rights to it. Reiner planned to direct it himself, while favouring Harrison Ford and Tom Cruise for Red and Andy respectively. Darabont seriously considered the offer, but seeing this as his one big shot to make it, turned it down, while taking a massive pay cut in order to direct the film himself, earning just $750,000 for writing and directing, plus a percentage of the net profits as well. Number 15, Tim Robbins spent time in solitary confinement to prepare for the role. In order to prepare to play Andy, Tim Robbins spent time in solitary confinement, asking to be locked into solitary for an afternoon in the hope of understanding the isolation and hopelessness. Robbins, of course, accepted that he'd only learn a fraction of what a truly solitary inmate would feel, given that his quote-unquote incarceration was ultimately voluntary and he could leave at any time. He also visited the zoo to observe caged animals, spoke with both prisoners and guards, and had his arms and legs shackled for several hours to better appreciate the physical rigors of being imprisoned. Number 14, people originally thought it was a Rita Hayworth biopic. Stephen King's original novella is called Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, but the decision was made to shorten the title both because of its overt wordiness and also the belief throughout the industry that Darabont was initially directing a biopic of actress Rita Hayworth. This was pervasive enough that Darabont received open submissions from actresses and supermodels about playing Hayworth before he dropped her name from the title. The director even received a call from an agent who claimed he'd read the script, only to inquire about the obviously non-existent Hayworth role. Number 13, Clancy Brown didn't want to portray a realistic corrections officer. Counter to Tim Robbins striving for absolute realism and authenticity in his performance, Clancy Brown went in the total opposite direction for his unforgettable portrayal of brutal prison guard Byron Hadley. After taking the part, Brown received offers from several real corrections officers to help him prepare for the part and ensure Hadley was as believable a screw as possible. But Brown ended up refusing all of these offers because he felt that Hadley was evil and wanted to tap into that rather than risk creating a misconception about the behaviors of real corrections officers. Number 12, a Castle Rock producer threatened to quit if they didn't make the movie. The Shawshank Redemption was a risky bet for production company Castle Rock Entertainment for several reasons, least not that prison dramas typically weren't successful at the box office. However, when Darabont's script came across the desk of Castle Rock producer Liz Glotzer, she loved it enough that she threatened to quit the company if they didn't agree to produce the movie. Thankfully, that gamble paid off, and then some, and in addition to Glotzer receiving an executive producer credit, she served as a co-producer on Darabont's 2007 King adaptation, The Mist. Number 11, the prison set almost burned down mid-shooting. In order to give the impression of sunlight in Andy and Red's prison cell block, plastic sheeting was placed over the windows, allowing lamps to shine behind them and convincingly depict the elements. However, while on a coffee break between takes, Darabont and extra Michael C. Poole noticed that one of the lamps had been placed too close to one of the windows, causing it to set aflame. Had they not discovered this purely by chance, the set could very well have burnt down or at least sustained major fire damage, putting production in jeopardy. Number 10. Frank Darabont's hands appear in 2 scenes. It's not uncommon for directors to give themselves sneaky cameos in their movies, and sensibly, Darabont decided to limit his cameo to a faceless one. The filmmaker actually appears in 2 scenes, both featuring shots of his hands. When Andy is shown loading his gun in the opening montage, those hands are actually Darabont's, and when Andy carves his name into his cell wall, that's once again the director's, handiwork. Sorry about that. Number 9. It was initially released to just 33 cinemas. The Shawshank Redemption was released in September 1994 to a mere 33 cinemas across North America, and it wasn't for another 3 weeks that it expanded to another 910 cinemas. That's pretty bad for the filmmakers already, but to make matters worse, this happened to be the very same day that Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction hit screens, which promptly steamrolled any chance it had of building ahead of steam at the box office. Worse still, Darabont and aforementioned executive producer Liz Glotzer visited a cinema on opening night and found it totally empty, even selling their own tickets to passers-by with the promise they could get a refund from Castle Rock if they didn't like it. Ouch. Number 8. Red cell number is a reference to The Shining. Any Stephen King fan worth their salt will be aware of the importance of the number 237, which of course refers to Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of King's The Shining, with room 237 of the iconic Overlook Hotel being haunted. Though in King's novel, it was actually in fact 217. 237 appears in some form in many adaptations of King's stories, and despite being the furthest thing from a conventional horror film, though it's plenty horrific in more tangible terms, The Shawshank Redemption is no exception. Red cell number, in fact, is 237. How cute. Number 7. It gave Roger Deakins his first Best Cinematography Oscar nomination. The film represented a major turning point for the career of now legendary cinematographer Roger Deakins, who, while already an incredibly experienced DP, earned his first Oscar nomination for his work on the film. This set Deakins on a 23-year path towards finally winning a Best Cinematography Oscar on his 14th nomination no less for Blade Runner 2049. Up until his belated win, Deakins was often cited as one of the most deserving repeated Oscar nominees to never actually take the gong home, and that narrative began quite aptly with this classic movie. Number 6. Charlie Sheen was desperate to play Andy. While the script was being passed around Hollywood, it ended up landing in the lap of rising star Charlie Sheen, who loved the script enough to call up a Castle Rock executive he was familiar with and then beg them to hire him to play Andy. Sheen even offered to do the part for nothing more than an SAG scale fee, and proposed filming a test reel to prove he was up to the task. However, Castle Rock refused, and shortly thereafter cast Tim Robbins in the part. As much of a laughingstock as Sheen might be nowadays, the earlier days of his career saw him genuinely give compelling dramatic performances, even if by the time Shawshank was going into production he was better known for comedy vehicles such as Hot Shots and its sequel. Number 5. Stephen King has one very specific criticism of the movie. Though Stephen King loved the film and regards it as one of the strongest adaptations of his work, he did have one very specific criticism of the film. King felt that the climactic reveal of Andy's tunnel felt too cartoonish due to the precisely round nature of the hole, which he compared to a tunnel you'd expect to see carved by Wile E. Coyote. And this is actually a sentiment shared by some fans, and you can absolutely see where King is coming from. For a hole chiseled over almost 20 years with a small rock hammer, it does look a little too perfect. Number 4. The iconic rain scene was a disaster to shoot. Surely the most iconic and unforgettable visual in the entire movie is that of Tim Robbins raising his arms into the air and soaking the pouring rain in after escaping Shawshank. It was featured in virtually all of the movie's marketing, yet the scene was very nearly ruined by technical issues during shooting, as every take Darabont shot was out of focus. Luckily, Roger Deakins and Darabont finally figured out the problems for the final possible setup they could shoot before moving on, filming one more successful take, which was in pristine focus. That's how close they came to not making cinematic history. Number 3, there's a curious font-related factual error. Even the most judiciously assembled period movies generally can't release without a historical factual mistake, and Shawshank is no exception. But it is a hilariously mundane error which has nevertheless been soundly missed by 99.999999999% of viewers. That's because the mistake actually refers to the font used on the stamp for Red's parole hearings. The first time we see the stamp is in 1947, with the stamp bearing the Helvetica font, except Helvetica wasn't invented until a decade later in 1957. Absolutely shambolic. Terrible if you ask me, not out of 10. Number 2, Sidney Poitier turned down the role of Red. Before Morgan Freeman won the role of Red and made it forever his own, it was in fact offered to the decidedly more famous Oscar winner, Sidney Poitier. And while it's easy to see how an actor of Poitier's legend and dignity could have delivered a performance on par with Freeman's work, Poitier actually turned the role down, believing that playing a convict wasn't setting a good example for a black man. Number 1, Frank Darabont originally wanted a more ambiguous ending. Darabont actually wanted the Shawshank Redemption to end in a decidedly more ambiguous fashion, hoping to conclude the movie on the shot of Red sat on the bus heading towards the Mexican border, feeling that the scripted reunion between Red and Andy was a little too sappy. Liz Glotzer, however, suggested that the audience deserved to see Red and Andy meet again, and provided Darabont with the money to shoot the scene regardless of his own opinion, while assuring him that he'd have final say on whether it was included or not. Darabont ultimately shot Red and Andy's reunion at a distance to give it some restraint, and cut some of their reunion dialogue for fear it was a little bit too cutesy. After test audiences rated it their favourite scene of the movie though, and both Freeman and Robbins lobbied for its inclusion, Darabont eventually relented. So that's our list. Is there anything I missed off here that you think would be cool to mention down in the comments below? And are you going to give the Shawshank Redemption another spin in honor of its 25th anniversary? I want to know down in the comments below. And while you're there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.